I'm going to try to remember a little bit of my PowerPoint presentation and leave a lot of time for questions. The Corps of Engineers regulates wetlands under the Clean Water Act. We've had a mitigation policy for mitigation. Actually is a complicated word, and it frequently is inappropriately used under CEQ and NEPA. Mitigation can actually include avoidance and minimization. Things, what we frequently call mitigation is really compensatory mitigation, the creation of a resource for a lost resource to replace function and value. And going back into the 1980s and 90s, I think President W. Bush or H. Bush first came out with the no net loss of wetlands, and no one really knew what that meant. We're working on it. Are we talking acreage? Are we talking function and value? And the answer is kind of a combination of both. And the program has been gravitating away from ratios. We used to have prescribed ratios. If you fill an acre of this type of wetland, you need to replace it at a 1-to-1 for herbaceous, a 1.5-to-1 for scrub shrub, and a 2-to-1 for forested. The thought being that the herbaceous wetland reestablishes itself quicker. You don't have as much temporal loss, where the forested systems and scrub shrub and more complicated systems, you had to compensate for the temporal loss associated with getting the created wetland back up to full function and value. There were a lot of issues that went on, but we were kind of winging it, trying to come up with how, what are we really doing here? And over a period of time, up until 2008, we started, there used to be a function and value tool called WET2, which really was a lot better than people give it credit for. Although what it did only give you is these values are either low, medium, or high. But it established an important principle that really has been carried through to most functional assessment units, and we now prefer HDM where it's available. But there are two components of wetlands that I think most functional value tools recognize. And one is the inherent value of a wetland to perform a function or perform a value versus the opportunity to do so. A grocery store full of food in Antarctica has a tremendous potential to feed people, but there are no people there, so it has no opportunity to perform those functions. A wetland that you could create could have tremendous potential, but if it had no surface connection to anything, if it didn't have an opportunity to interact with water coming through it, then its actual value may be compromised by the fact that inherently it's great from a function and value perspective. It really can't realize its true potential, so it doesn't provide what you want. We have gravitated toward using the HDM approach for analyzing impacts, both on the impacted wetland and for trying to design a mitigation site that we can quantify the functional values of the mitigation site there, and we can quantify the impacts and try to really mitigate for replacing function and value. We came out with a new mitigation rule in 2008. Kind of was groundbreaking for us because it really codified it for the first time what our goals were for mitigation. It became law. It set up a policy. It set up a hierarchy where, generally speaking, in most cases, we prefer the use of mitigation banks. They go through a more rigorous review procedure. There are financial assurances in place. it's been, there's a Mitigation Bank review team that has gone through this. It's undergone tremendous scrutiny, and we generally favor banks. Then we go to basically looking at a hydrologic unit or replacing those values within a hydrologic unit. And in decreasing preference, we get down to preservation, and I'm actually real big on preservation. Our mitigation rule kind of puts it down at the lower rungs of the ladder, and typically, according to our rule, there needs to be some type of imminent threat. So if you have a Spartina alterniflora marsh, the thought is it's pretty protected. There's not a lot of things you can legally do on that piece of property, so preserving it really isn't doing anything to give you no net loss of function and value, because there's really not a tremendous threat to that system versus a forested system where you could legally log it, timber it. You could legally, if you were real smart, drain it, and you know, that's more complicated to do than it sounds on the surface. But we try to look at systems from that approach, and from a preservation standpoint, we do look at there needing to be an imminent threat. Now, this is Steve Walls, this is not Corps of Engineers. I think every wetland in Texas is threatened. I don't care if it's the salt marsh or what kind of thing. I came here from Virginia, where we fought about half-acre wetlands, and the first couple applications I got were 60-acre canal front subdivision permit applications, and I'm going, I haven't seen one of these in 20 years. But be that as it may, that's my spin. That's not official Corps policy. But I'm big on preservation, especially where you can get the benefit of numbers, larger numbers. I've worked several times with NIFWIT for pipeline projects where there aren't enough mitigation banks in the state of Texas. There really aren't. There are big holes, and there are people coming through. There are a lot of pipelines. There are a lot of impacts to forested areas. And I'm real big on working with NIFWIT, and we've done several preservation projects where we've added large tracts of forested areas contiguous to an existing wildlife refuge, or consistent to an existing state park. And I think bigger is better when it comes to habitat function. There are a lot of species that are size specific. Certain birds won't nest in areas that are smaller than a certain size. So to me, bigger is better, and I very much am a proponent of wisely planned preservation. The mitigation rule that we have has also encompassed, there's some people that think Corps of Engineers mitigation plans don't work real well, and I've had some discussions with a few of those people today. We are trying to put more emphasis on any mitigation plan we accept now has to contain 12 different factors, and among those factors are a defined plan, goals, monitoring, contingency plans for what happens if this doesn't happen, and I think most importantly, our financial assurances. And we've been a little bit slow on the uptake on the financial assurances. Texas is a big property rights state. Coming from the East Coast, it is a different world out here, and but we are working real hard to on our mitigation projects to provide those financial assurances, to find out what the cost of doing this would be, doing this plan would be if someone were to happen to walk away from it, if a company builds and goes bankrupt, or the mitigation doesn't get done. So we are working real hard to try to incorporate those types of features into our plans. One of the things that I really liked from Virginia that we don't have in Texas is an in lieu fee program. And I know that I was talking to a gentleman from the Galveston Bay Foundation. Virginia had an in lieu fee program with the Nature Conservancy. And I think one of the smartest things that they did, and it might go over at first like a lead balloon here, but sometimes filling a wetlands is a simple business decision if in filling an acre it's worth $150,000 and you offer preservation of 10 acres that you got for $2,000. It's just a business decision. It's like I'm $80,000 in the clear here by doing this. It actually, in my opinion, encourages the exact opposite of what the 404B guidelines wants, which is avoidance and minimization up front and then mitigation. This in lieu fee program that the Norfolk District Corps has with the Corps of Engineers requires the individual to have a third party appraiser appraise what the filled value of the wetland would be, and then they have to contribute that amount. So if they're filling in three acres of alterniflora for a port area and that's now worth $250,000 an acre, they're having to fork out $750,000 into this in lieu fee program, and that can buy some great buffer areas and some great areas around wildlife refuge. You know, the Galveston Bay Foundation has a plan, the Nature Conservancy has a plan, but I think that is a great idea from two instances. It provides a needed backup that I think we need because we don't have enough mitigation banks. It takes away the incentive to fill wetlands as just as a business decision. Hey, this just makes financial sense for me. I think if people start having to pay the value of what their improved property is to mitigate for it, you're going to see a lot more avoidance and minimization of the resources that are impacted. You know, I'm starting to fade a little bit on my PowerPoint presentation. I've talked about the priorities, the 12 steps, the financial assurances, wanted to bring up the in lieu fee thing, which is something that I think is something that would be a great fit for Texas. But you know, I'm pretty much through with my PowerPoint. If y'all have any questions, yes.
Yeah, we'll start, John. I think there could be a lot of questions here. You know, we know, I guess that same rule that you talked about on mitigation banking certainly prioritized watershed based, which you can say watershed. So I just wondered a little bit about that. You know, because Houston and Regina, Saskatchewan are in the same watershed.
Right.
Right. Gulf of Mexico. Actually,
Yeah.
Saskatchewan. Yes. So, I mean, but that's, I say that
I've seen things like, yeah.
But the question is, what's that scale, right? So
Yeah.
we see, for example, we see that there's mitigation on Highway 99 on
Right.
Cape Prairie that's being taken care of by a very fine mitigation bank, the Green Divided mitigation bank, but a different kind of watershed, right? So how tight is that watershed?
It's a great question, and I'll tell you an example that I worked on where we dealt with that issue. The project was in Armand Bayou, which was an area of high consideration from a watershed perspective. The mitigation bank was 50 miles away, and some of the people around the Armand Bayous were saying, hey, you know, it's great that you're doing it mitigation, but it's 50 miles away up the watershed. Sure, it's in the same HUC code, it's in the same service area, but Armand Bayou is kind of a special area. So we ended up working out a plan where half the mitigation was done on site in Armand Bayou and the other half was done at the mitigation bank. So, you know, because of the input of people commenting on the public notice, that issue became apparent to us, and we thought it was a great comment. So we split the mitigation up to try to both accommodate our rule a mitigation bank, but to also make sure there was at least one-to-one functional replacement there in the Armand Bayou watershed on site within that watershed and not 50 miles away. That is something that we consider, and I can't, you know, I mean, I'm the smartest person in Galveston district. I catch those things, but there are some that don't. So write them down in your public notices and send them in.
Speak to that one.
Well, that was just a follow-up question, because, you know, developers will often say, well, you know, here, you sort of mentioned that, what was going on in Virginia, you know, you're developing in a certain area where land prices might be, you know, by the square foot, right? So
Right.
several $100,000 an acre or something. They say, well, I can't afford to mitigate in this watershed. Say if I'm in the Dickinson Bayou watershed, well, this is very expensive. You know, is that something that the Corps can hold people's feet to the fire?
Yeah, we do.
And how much difference does it make? I guess I heard you say is that people commenting on these things. You know,
It makes a tremendous difference if we receive the comments on that, and it is an issue. And as I said, Texas is a huge property rights state. I was involved when I was with the Corps in Virginia, where we actually put a wetland consultant behind bars for 2 years for a pattern of presenting false information in permit applications. Texas judges don't want to throw people in jail for filling wetlands. It's kind of a truth that we deal with. Is we don't find a lot of U.S. attorneys that want to go after 80-year-old farmers and have them thrown in jail for, you know, I've been working this land all my life, and you want drained it so there aren't skeeters out here, and now you want me to do what with it? And it's a different world here, so we've got to work within the world we are, but we do try to accommodate that, and we do try to hold their feet to the fire. Now, for small projects where the impacts are minimal, it was a regulatory guidance. Our mom and pop operation, they've got a small piece of property, they want to build their house on it. We have a little bit of more flexibility in our interpretation of alternatives via the 404B1 guidelines. We're not going to send mom and pop out to do a regional study of where else they might want to build their house and impact 1/4 of an acre. But we're going to hold their feet to the fire to do the mitigation. So there is some flexibility that our regulations provide for small projects. But as far as mitigation, we are trying to assure. Now it's a regional or it's a programmatic goal. It's not a case-by-case goal. There are situations where it generally on nationwide permits where the impacts are in the hundredths of an acre, we typically do not require compensation for those impacts, but our goal on anything bigger than that is to replace it. And there are some cases where full compensation is just not practicable because of the circumstances, but we have been trying, and you've told me that you've found some holes in that, but we have been trying to show, and the data that I'm seeing, data that you're interpreting may be different, is that we're accomplishing those goals in the Galveston Bay watershed. And a lot of what's helping us there is the Galveston Bay Foundation, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Ducks Unlimited. I mean, I've got a 90-acre wetland restoration project that we're doing under Nationwide 27. We see a lot of wetland restoration projects and beneficial use projects that are funded. Some of them have been funded by Deepwater, some of them have been funded by Ag Funds, some of them, I don't know where the funding comes from, but we've had a lot of TPWD, Galveston Bay wetland restoration projects that are ongoing right now. That there are 100 acres, 150 acres, Brazoria County Wildlife Refuge. There's been subsidence, and they had a channel that was part of providing access to the refuge, and they went in and sprayed and raised the elevation of the wetlands 8 inches along the sides because it was subsiding to the point that it no longer was supporting wetlands, and it came back real well. And so we have a lot of those things going on, but
Yeah.
I was just gonna talk about one on the permitting side, and then I'm Becky Martinez with flood control with the Greens Pike Mitigation Bank. And it just seems like since as a result of the 2008 rule, that really pushed an evolution of the process. And just that we felt it at our own bank, just in our own experience, whereas when we were first permitted, we were able to accept if you had an impact anywhere in the county, you could come to the Greens Bayou Wetlands Mitigation Bank. Now recently we've done an expansion. We did an amendment to our permit that was just approved last fall. And as a result of that 08 rule, and then really as a result of other projects in the area, our service areas have changed directly as a result of those two things. Where now it's our service areas are based on a watershed that's defined by the H-digit hydrologic unit codes. It's no longer all of Harris County or Galveston Bay. And then we also have just within our own bank. I don't pretend to know everybody's service areas, but there's the recognition that the Katy Prairie area is a special area, and that's a called out area where we can no longer, even though it would technically be in a 8-digit HUC that's adjacent to our primary service area, where we can't accept mitigation. Now, it's written in an interesting way in the permit, but the feelings behind it were based on this area is different. This is a different area. This acts as its own watershed, and so it's not appropriate to mitigate for impacts here over here. And so I think that it's an evolution in the as a result of the regulation.
It sounds like
a community too.
Yeah.
Once you've
people kind of
once you've
the ring in the bell.
Once you've established a service area there, are you saying that we're coming back and shrinking your service area after the fact, or are you updating?
Yeah, as a result of our amendment.
Okay.
I'm
okay.
not gonna lie. We went in and said, we want to keep it the same.
Well,
and they're like, no, we can't keep it the same.
the other thing that I would advise all mitigation bankers to do, and I have a lot of mitigation banker friends in Virginia, is they get all the public notices for the projects in their HUC code, and they hold the course feet to the fire of, hey, we went through a lot of process and a lot of expense to jump through all of your hoops to get this mitigation bank, and I see that there's a permit out here where there's a permittee responsible mitigation plan. Hey, it's in our watershed, and how about giving us a little deference here, because we sometimes the project managers may be young, they may not know what's going on, but hold our feet to the fire. I've seen instances where some of these developers don't want to pay what you're charging, and I actually had a case where there was a consultant who said they were going to mitigate the mitigation bank, and as I was drafting the permit, I asked them for their HGM. We public noticed it as a mitigation bank only mitigation, and some young pup that they just hired sent me all their HGM, and they were giving themselves credits for the on-site detention ponds that they built, and only buying credits for what was left over. And I said, hold on, we public noticed this as a permit, as a mitigation bank. What you're doing is permittee responsible. We need to do one of two things. You need to go to the bank, or we need to put this back out on public notice, because you guys, I'm not saying they deliberately did it, but they deliberately did it. And they were trying to sneak something by us and count their detention ponds as, well, we determined the HCM. That's not how we public noticed it. That's not how the public commented on it. And we made them change their plan. But anybody that's got a bank, anybody that's concerned about an area like Armand Bayou, comment on it. Get your name on the list, comment on those projects. If you have these issues, we don't always like them because we're bombarded by comments, but it's our job to make sure that it's done. So, yes.
Sorry, a little off topic, but I wonder if there's a landowner who has wetlands and thinks, okay, there could be more, and is interested in a mitigation bank, what do they need to know before, what would you like them to know before they pick up the phone and call you? What questions would you ask them?
Well, I would like to know if they've talked to anybody and actually had a delineation done of the site. What kind of wetlands are they?
Size?
What are they threatened? You know, like, yeah, I'm getting ready to. I've got a chainsaw fired up. I'm ready to go. You know, that might get a quicker answer. But yeah, the other thing that having worked in Virginia and not here, there's no state tax in Texas, so you don't get this benefit. But in Virginia, in addition to the federal write-off, Virginia allows you. It's just not a write-off. It's a straight tax. It's not a deduction. It's a straight tax write-off. If you have $50,000 worth of land, you can take that straight off the amount of taxes you owe for the state of Virginia for up to 15 years. So that's a big incentive to a lot of people there because like I said, it's not a deduction, it's a straight write-off for as long as it takes typically to amortize that cost out. Texas doesn't, you don't pay state taxes, so there's no, that doesn't occur here, but it's a big deal in other places. But tell us what you have, provide us a prospectus. Generally, as I was explaining earlier, we are one of the few districts left in the country that isn't cradle to grave. And by that I mean typically there's one person that handles the project, handles the compliance, handles the enforcement. There's no policy section. Everyone's involved in these sort of things. In Galveston, we have a compliance section, we have a policy section, and in that policy section, primarily you're going to be talking to Sam Watson and Jason Hudson about mitigation banks. If there's a violation, you're going to be talking to Kenny James, and as we said earlier, once I write that permit and turn it in, I don't ever see it again. But the key would be to I would get, it sounds like there's a lot of people here that are willing to help that kind of effort. But tell us what you have. You know, NWIs are pretty good. They're a good start. But a lot of the drier regime, the A regimes, PFO1As, they sometimes don't meet our hydrology requirements and don't match up real well. When you start getting into the C's and the E's and the F's and the more permanent water tables, the NWI maps get a lot more accurate and are a lot more closely aligned to what our jurisdiction is. But engage us as soon as you can. Tell us what you've got and give us at least a prospectus, and then we can tell you what we need to go to the next step of actually forming a review team and things of that nature.
I'm curious, the tools have been developed to compare the functionality of created and natural wetlands. Do you think those tools would allow you to make statements about the equivalence of ecosystem services provided by natural and created wetlands?
I think they would enable us to make generalizations.
Well, I mean, that's all we can.
We
could turn functionality into sort of an ecosystem services.
I don't think. I mean, I've seen a lot of it is how the wetlands created. One of the most effective wetlands that I ever worked on when I was at the Corps in Virginia is the Navy wanted to build a barrack. They had to build it there. It was an emergent shrub wetland, and they didn't care about the money. We said they took the topsoil, the top foot of the area that they were filling and stockpiled it, built their barracks, went down to Back Bay, dug an area out deeper than they needed it, and took all that material down there that had the seed base and the roots and everything else, and put it on the top foot. And within 1 year, you couldn't have said that it hadn't been there for 100 years. It does take, you know, when you're creating them from uplands, it does take time to establish a lot of the things.
But in some of these ecosystem services things, location is also important. Like,
well,
could
yeah.
the bird watchers still get to it?
Oh yeah, location is extremely important, and that's where I talked about the inherent ability versus the, is it really providing the service? It may attract birds, but if you can't get to it, it has no bird watching benefit to it. So if bird watching is important, put that into your, if bird watching is important, put trails into your plan and do that. But you know, we do listen to your comments. We get your comments. They're supposed to be addressed, and as whether or not they're compliant. And once they leave my desk, I don't determine that.
Appreciate you coming. Let's give Steve a big hand.
Thank you.